Look at this Gatorade truck. I saw a meme recently that said, "Stop killing gators to make Gatorade." Thought that was hilarious. Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal, Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. Today should be a good day. Today we're gonna talk about somebody a lot of you probably don't know of, but you should. He's a real pioneer in music, and sometimes a lot of his contributions get forgotten. We're here in, as you can see, Fort Lauderdale, and we're going to talk about JACO Pastorius today. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins now. We're gonna start out at the cemetery today, and we'll go a little bit backwards. He's buried here at the Our Lady Queen of Heaven Catholic Cemetery. Also buried here, Vince McMahon, Sr. His was a very sad story. When you first come in, you want to go all the way around to the back side of the lake to section L. He's located in the corner over here. So if you come back to the back corner and you look for that tall one, there are 3 of them in this section going along the wall. Go back to the one furthest back and look for this. And JACO Pastorius is actually right here. Many consider the greatest electric bass player of all time. JACO Pastorius has sometimes been called the Jimi Hendrix of the bass, and many people that knew him said he wasn't a bass player. The guy was just a flat-out musician. He just had music coming out of him, and he just happened to use the bass to facilitate it. You can see here his name was John F. Pastorius. Born in 1951, passed away in 1987, at the age of 35 years old. And what's sad is that he actually prophesied many years before that he would die around that age. JACO Pastorius' father was a musician. He was what they called a rounder. A lot of people call him a rounder. And he was a musician, he was a singer, he was a drummer, but he was just a guy that was, you know, he was really never home. He was always out living the musician's life. Whenever he was home and the family would go out anywhere, people always wanted to be around his dad because his dad just had like this electric personality, and JACO would be said to have that same personality later on in life. Even when his father was performing one time at like a crab house, JACO's mom brought him to see his dad perform, and they put JACO up on a piano bench and he sang the entire Fly Me to the Moon Frank Sinatra album all the way through as a little kid. He wasn't really known. I wouldn't say, you know, when you talk about a lot of like musicians, you would say, oh, well, they were the bass player of this band, or they were the, you know, guitar player of this band. That wasn't really how you would describe him, even though he did play on several albums with Joni Mitchell and would do an album with his friend Pat Metheny and would be in Weather Report and do all kinds of things. He was always known as kind of his own thing. He had his own kind of cult following. He made solo records. His dream was always, you know, he was a gifted musician, and he always just wanted to play with the best. He was lucky. He said he was a product of growing up in Florida, and he said back when he was growing up, there were no prejudices in music in Florida. There was such a cultural melting pot that you could hear Cuban music or country music, jazz, rhythm and blues, rock, and you could enjoy it all, and that's basically where his style came from. He was a bass player. He turned himself into a bass player from being a drummer. He had, I guess, broke his wrist, and it healed in such a way that it just wasn't going to be possible for him to be a full-time drummer, so he took up the bass, and he was using it in a way other people didn't. He could play entire songs, like not just the melody, but like he could play every part to every instrument on the song on his bass all at the same time. voice, his, you know, a lot of times bass players were part of just a rhythm section with the drums. They didn't play a melody, and he incorporated playing a melody as though he were a horn player. Very unique for its time. People like Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers state JACO Pastorius is one of their heavy influences. You know, sadly, he had a lot of problems, and growing up he saw his father living that rounder lifestyle, so everybody that played music with him early on, because he got started like really early when he was still in high school, he was already in bands, and then he was like, he wanted to marry his high school sweetheart and told her when they were seniors, like, you need to get pregnant now, this is our time to have a kid. And he was a local musician and everything, but they started seeing, you know, even though he was completely anti-drugs and alcohol because of his father, several years into playing and into Weather Report, touring with Weather Report, he would start really indulging in those. And it wasn't that he was just an abuser of drugs and alcohol, it's actually that they didn't find out till many years later that he was bipolar, and that he had this kind of bipolarity that could throw him into states of depression and mania at the same time. So there'd be several times in his life where he would just be like completely gone mentally, like he could not be stopped. He would be out with his girlfriend, he would like do something that would almost get him killed by somebody on the street, like picking a fight or just doing something that was completely erratic behavior. Even being one of the greatest musicians in the world, he would find himself at a point where people wouldn't work with him. People would talk about him and say what an influence he was, but he couldn't get hired, and he ended up becoming homeless, walking around the Fort Lauderdale area, sleeping in parks. Even he had this bass that he just treasured. It was the bass of doom. Early on, when you couldn't get an electric bass that didn't have frets, he took a butter knife and pulled the frets out of his bass so that it would sound more like an upright jazz bass. And that became something that they would eventually make a lot of guitars like that later on for bass players. But he was one night, I guess, just sleeping in the park, and someone stole his bass. And many years later, the bass player of Metallica, Robert Trujillo, was able to reacquire that bass, and I believe he gave it to JACO's family. He had 4 kids. So I mentioned he prophesized his own death. Yeah, one night he was out with a friend. They were drinking sake, I guess, in Japan, and the friend said JACO just started crying. And I said, JACO, what's the matter? He said, I'm gonna die at 34 years old. I want you to take care of my kids. I want you to tell me that you'll take care of my family, because I'm not gonna be here. And he was like, yeah, I will. But he just always thought that was so crazy. And then many years later, that same friend would be playing in a club, and JACO he had a habit late in his life of just showing up places that because he was so good, he was used to people just inviting him up on stage. We got to a point where he would just show up at shows and just jump on stage uninvited and would get thrown out. And they were gonna throw him out of a club one night and have him arrested, and his friend was there and said, hey, you know, I gotta leave and take JACO home. I don't want him to get arrested. And he said, when I got him in the car and started driving, I said, hey, where do you live now? And JACO said, I live in the park. And he started crying. He said, he kind of knew how he ended up there, but he said, like, what are you crying about? And he said, because I don't want to be here anymore. So I'm going to go to his old neighborhood. He was actually born in Norristown, Pennsylvania. We're not going to go there, but we are going to go to Oakland Park, where he was raised as a child. I believe his family moved to Florida when he was 7 years old, and they have a park that they have named after him and have a great mural there, and I'd like to see it. As you saw, his name was not JACO. When he was named John after his father, his parents didn't want to call him John. They didn't want to call him Jack either, so his mom came up with the nickname JACO, which is pretty appropriate because he was an athlete his whole life. He would play baseball even when he wasn't playing bass. I don't mean professionally, I mean for fun, but a lot of the time you would see him on stage or anywhere, he was always wearing a Philadelphia Phillies hat. Here you can see we've made it over to the park that's named after him and a community center. So here they have this giant beautiful park. You can see all the way down at the opposite end from where we entered, they have some really nice archways that say City of Oakland Park, and they have a nice fountain down there and everything. But what I actually wanted to come here and take a look at was, I mentioned that they had a very nice remembrance and mural to JACO, but it's actually two, one on each side of the building. I love it. Take a look at that. Spent much of his time in this area, in this neighborhood when he was growing up. He was a pretty active kid. That's kind of why it's, you know, so apropos in a way that they have this park named after him, because when he was a kid, he was so into athletics and played basketball, football, baseball especially. Loved playing baseball his whole life, and even had a paper route in Oakland Park, and his dad would say that that's how JACO ended up buying his first instrument, is that he had a paper route that he would deliver 250 papers a day. As a former paper boy, I don't even know how that's possible, but that is something. Let's go and look at the other side. I love this. And then, like I mentioned, then later on in his life, when he would be suffering from the issues with his bipolarity, he would find comfort for some reason in a park. He would spend a lot of time in the parks and sleeping in the parks, both in New York City and when he was back here in his last days. He had two wives. He married his first wife was his high school sweetheart, and then after that fell apart, he married another woman named Ingrid, and they had twins together, but his behavior was just so erratic that she just couldn't allow him to be around the kids, so that was sad. One of the stories at his funeral, one of his friends said, was one of the twins coming up to him afterward, after the funeral, and saying, "When's Daddy gonna jump out of the box?" It's a great mural though, with his beloved bass. Yeah, the deal with that was that he removed those frets. There's little metal frets in there that help the strings reverberate off them. But if you're good enough and you can use your fingers without those, you get a much softer sound. So that's what he was going for. He took a butter knife and popped out all those frets and then filled it with epoxy. So when they started making fretless basses years later, and the JACO Pastorius bass itself, it would be that same way, where it would be epoxied frets. Let's go see where his childhood home was. Oh, actually, I just saw this. We should definitely read this. John Francis Pastorius III. Actually, you can add John Francis Anthony, because that was his confirmation name. Anthony Pastorius III was born in Norristown, PA, but grew up here in Oakland Park and graduated from Northeast High School. At the age of 22, JACO taught music at the University of Miami, where he met Pat Metheny, with whom he had made some of his first recordings. In the mid-70s, he debuted his first solo album titled JACO Pastorius, which became an international hit and rocked the music world. JACO's talents as a virtuoso bass player, as well as a composer, were destined to change how the electric bass was played. JACO was to become the recipient of numerous awards, such as Downbeat's Hall of Fame, the first electric bass player ever, many Grammys, and the best bass player who ever lived, so titled by the leading bass magazine of the day. He was a member of Weather Report, a historic modern jazz group. JACO's extraordinary musical skill and his impact on jazz in the latter part of the 20th century has been compared to that of Charlie Parker. JACO's untimely death at the age of 35 left a large void in the heart of the music scene. This mural and park pay tribute to the late great JACO. And his house was just a couple of blocks away. I could find no addresses online for his home, but I did find a photo and was able to find it from there. So this was apparently one of his childhood homes here. had his paper route in this neighborhood. And like I said, his dad wasn't around a whole lot once they moved to Florida. For some reason, his dad basically told his mom, like, you can take care of the family, and he didn't really have a stable place. He would sometimes be here, he would send the family money, but his mom had a really rough childhood, so she always just wanted someone to take care of, so she took care of her boys. And so JACO had the paper route, saved up enough money, bought his first drum set like his father, and then he ended up injuring himself and couldn't play the drums, so he, I believe, sold that and bought an upright bass. And then he said one day he went over to where he was storing the upright bass, and it was like broken into 100 pieces because of the Florida humidity. So that's when he went and got the electric bass and took the frets out and everything. But his girlfriend, who he ended up marrying, his first wife, she lived in this neighborhood as well, and it was actually thanks to her that he was got his big break. He was playing in clubs, and she had a job at one of the clubs and was on the softball team. And Blood, Sweat, and Tears were in town playing a show, and the drummer was sitting in on the softball game, and he noticed JACO's wife, and whenever I started talking to her, said, like, I don't know you from the club. And she said, oh, I'm not there very often. I have I think she had like an accounting job or something. She was there during the day. And he said, are you married? And she said, yeah, to the best bass player in the world. And he said, well, then I gotta meet him. And he said when he met JACO, he played Donna Lee, which was like, you know, that's a famous trumpet song with solos and everything. And JACO played it all by himself, and he said, we got to get you a record deal. And they went to New York and started working on the recordings that became his first record. Pretty cool, huh? Now we're gonna go see one of the sadder places. Actually, very, very sad place. So we're now over in a shopping plaza, and this was where a club was called the Midnight Bottle Club, and it was the early hours of September 12th, 1987 that JACO had his, basically his deadly beating here. What happened was he had went several hours before and saw Carlos Santana perform and had jumped up on stage and had been removed, and then eventually found his way over to the club that used to be here, Midnight Bottle Club, and he ended up acting up in there, and they kicked him out. And when they kicked him out, he kicked the door, and one of the bodyguards, or one of the security guards for the place, it was the son of the people who owned it, and he came out and started yelling. This is, I mean, there's varying accounts of what happened, but he came out and was yelling at JACO and then chased JACO apparently to an alleyway somewhere around here, and then beat him, hit him several times, beat him to death. From what I understand, JACO wasn't even trying to defend himself, he was just trying to run away. And the person that beat him was actually a 3rd-degree black belt. JACO ended up in the hospital and was in there for several days, and then had a brain hemorrhage, and they told his family that he had no more brain activity. He was on a respirator, and then they had to make the sad decision to shut off the respirators, and he passed away 3 hours later. And the person that, the security guard that chased him down and beat him, and is who everyone credits with killing him, even on the police report it says death by homicide. He ended up only serving 4 months and was released. Now, I didn't want to end it on such a sad note, because there's something cool that you can still come and see of JACO. Not just the park, there's something that he left behind, and we're gonna go see it. I think you'll be amused by where we're going to next. All right, we're here. So, yeah, I know you're like, wait a minute, what Hustler? Hustler Hollywood, the porno store? Yep, but that's what's here now. because what we want is, if you go walk right around this corner on the sidewalk, they have a little something from bygone days. Other than this homeless person stuff, they have a bunch of people that have put their names and handprints along this walk, and JACO has. Now, this one is just a memorial for Sid Vicious from the Sex Pistols. That one says, "Love Diana Trash," with the ABC logo down there. That one says, "To Peaches," because that was the name of this was actually a record store that used to be here. It was called Peaches. So this one says, Lonnie Liston, Peter Frampton. You can see Peter Frampton. Left hand, right foot is what it says, and it's got the A&M records. Over here is Charlie Daniels. What is that? Luciano. I'm not sure who that is. 1975. This one's the Righteous Brothers. This one says Jim Dandy from Jim Dandy. Rick Springfield. The Michael Stanley Band. Let's see, there's some drumsticks in here. Nigel. Not sure who that says. Here's Kansas. The whole band. Looks like it says the Blackbirds. And then here's JACO right here. It says, you can see he was on Epic at the time. It says Peaches, my hometown record store, makes good. Love JACO. Now, one of the great things, I love that he put his feet in here, because now, oh, and it looks like he put his handprints in here as well as his kids, because when his daughter Mary was born, that's when he said, you know what, I have to do something that people have never ever seen before on the bass. I have to revolutionize it. And the footprints I love, because he used to always throw like sand or powder down on the ground where he was playing, and he would dance around like James Brown while he was playing. Now, just because they're here, I see looks like Ralph Carter and that one I'm not sure. It's an A&M Records person. Somebody will tell me in the comments. Rupert Holmes. And that says Point Blank. But yeah, what a cool thing. If you know about JACO and you know his history of this town, it's so cool to see that that's here. Well, my friends, I never end a vlog in front of a hustler store, but there's a first time for everything. Hope you all enjoyed this vlog. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great night and goodbye.